Hi everybody, this is Nick from Saberz.com, and this is Project M. I am really excited to show this to you today. What you're looking at is just a 3D printed prototype. The final version will be T6 aircraft grade aluminum and will be available for pre-order starting right now. But I'm going to walk you through the front and the back of the Saber. So we're going to start from the very front of the emitters. What you see here is the on-screen version of when the lightsaber is deactivated. This is shown only one time. Everything else, when you see the face of the emitter, looks like this. This is the Anakin Starkiller replica, one of our physical references. We will include both sets of emitter caps, so you can swap them out and use whichever you prefer. And yes, this will accept electronics and a blade. Next up is the fin area, which is really tricky and a really kind of sensitive area that we spent a ton of time getting just right. So for that, I want to turn over to probably our most important physical reference, which is the EFX Darth Maul lightsaber replica. This is cast from an actual screen-used hero prop, and everything that's between the fender washers is 100% perfect. They decided to go with just machined emitter discs that don't properly replicate fender washers, but everything else on this Saber is pretty much perfect. These fins have a really kind of nuanced geometry that's never been properly replicated before. So if we compare it to, say, one of the more popular replicas out there, you can see it's often done with flat tops on the fins and with really hard edges and without always getting the length quite right. And you can see it doesn't really reflect exactly what our physical reference looks like here. When you go ahead and compare to Project M, you can see that these are done spot on. Everything's done just right. The tops are rounded just exactly as the original. The edges of each fin have something like a 0.2 millimeter radius curve on the edge, so just a very slight smoothing of the edges there. And then, of course, the actual geometry of the fin right there is going to be just spot on compared to the physical reference. So we took a long time doing that. So now moving on to the button section. This is another really tricky area with a lot of small nuances that we took great care to replicate. So on top is the EFX one. That's, again, cast from a screen-used prop. And this is Project M, our replica. So the first thing we should talk about is the red button, which is replicated from an actual found item that was found. It's called a blanking cap. This is not an original blanking cap. This is a replica from Roman's Empire that's really, really good and really accurate to the original. However, on the Darth Maul prop, because this was a cast item, molded and cast and pulled from the mold, it got a little squished and a little warped in the recasting. And so rather than use the dimensions of the original button, we chose to replicate the actual dimensions as on the prop. And sometimes they're not even totally consistent, so this is actually slightly ovular. We did go with a circle, but we chose to average the dimensions of this oval to get the dimensions of our circle. And then this button is just slightly taller than the original blanking cap, only by about 0.5 millimeter or so, but we chose to replicate as faithfully as we could the actual screen-used prop in order to get exactly the right saber. Another thing you'll notice, and this is true for both the red and silver buttons, is that the buttons are very, very slightly dished inwards. They slope downwards, just a tiny fraction of a bit. It's not enough that you would really be able to notice it unless you're really, really looking for it. And when the light hits it just right, you can see that dishing. So we chose to replicate that faithfully as well. The silver button has not been identified yet in the real world, so we simply replicated it as faithfully as we could. We got the knurling just right, which generally isn't done properly. I've never seen anyone replicate the knurls just as finely as they are on the actual prop. It's a rounded profile. It's not a hard chamfer, as you'll see on many replicas. And it's a really kind of tricky curve to get just right, given that it's not identical all the way across on each of the 4 examples of the silver button that you'll see on any given prop. Then again, with the rectangular pockets here and between the 2 buttons, and then the LED detail and the rivet detail, those are really really delicate items that haven't quite been done properly either. So we really took our time to get those right. We have a couple of really good reference photos on original parts that weren't cast. And then, of course, we have the physical references on hand. So we replicated just as best we could. So thanks for taking a look. These are up for pre-order right now at Saberz.com. What you're looking at here again is just a 3D print that was just sprayed with some rattle can spray paints. For the actual replica, we're going to be machining out of T6 6061. That's an aircraft grade aluminum. We're going to have some hard anodized treatments as well as a paint application to match the original paints of the original prop. We've studied that paint really thoroughly, been through hundreds of dollars in swatch books to match the paints. So we're going to do that just right, as with all of the other little details of this Saber. And finally, let's look at a couple of comparison photos. We're going to be comparing to the EFX Mall, which is essentially reference material. It's cast from a screen-used prop, and also the KR Menace replica. Normally, I don't like to compare to other people's replicas. I think it's in poor taste, but we've had some specific requests from people in the community to compare to this exact replica. So I have a few comparison photos. Note that these were all taken with a tripod and with a fixed mount. So all of the photos are taken from exactly the same angle to make sure the perspective is correct and the sizing is correct. And so these comparison photos should show you how Project M compares to the EFX, our reference material, as well as to that KR Menace Saber. So in this first image, we can see just a general comparison. Here's a zoomed in shot showing just exactly how our buttons compare to the reference material. Note again the curvature of the silver button and the very fine vertical knurling. That knurling can get smudged on the screen-used props, which again were cast pieces, but our replica has perfect knurling everywhere. Here's a shot of the LED and rivet detail. Again, we took a lot of care to get this just right in a way that I don't think has really been done properly before. And finally, a look at just the emitter section of each Saber. I really like this view because it shows just how bang on right we got the emitter fins. Those are really, really tricky, but you can see how the specular highlights match perfectly from Project M to the EFX Mall. There is a lot of shaping going on here that you can't really see at first glance, but does make a difference when you are actually replicating the prop. And again, this isn't final paint. This was just rattle can paint that I got at the local hardware store. Final production will match the original prop perfectly. Project M is up for pre-order right now on Saberz.com. This is going to be a limited edition replica, so grab it while you can. Thank you so much.